concentration issues. So, I mean, here in the research we said they were finding that concentration didn't seem to have too much of effect on wavelength, and so Ethan decided to dive in and try to replicate that. And here he is creating spectra, trying to look at concentration. So different people in the beta community are providing different feedback, either on hardware or on the actual testing procedure itself. And some folks are starting to come up with some ideas for modifying the kit, which is great, so that we can make a more usable version for other people in the future. So. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Matthew. Mete, I was really intrigued by your research note about the oil testing in water and the hypothesis you were testing about freezing the water. Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've done so far and kind of what your thoughts are in terms of extracting oil from water in order to run it through this sample?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Stevie. So, yeah, we are. I'm working on discovering several different ways of how to extract oil from water and how to extract different kinds of oil. I'm right now testing. So first I started working. So there are several different ways how to extract oil, which I'm thinking to do. First one, which I did, is seems to be the simplest and maybe quite effective, which is extracting oil by freezing from water. This is actually a pretty easy thing to do at home or wherever. That's why I chose it. It's just, you have oil in water, so you wait a little bit to settle it down, then you freeze the sample, and the oil really nicely separates from the frozen ice from the water, and then you can nicely collect it without any water residue in the sample. So that's pretty cool, and I started doing that, and I was surprised when I was doing it that obviously not all oil is collected. It looks like 1/3 or a little bit, or maybe half of the product is just recovered. So I started.
How did you know that?
Because I measured, I precisely, I tried to measure, like how much do I put in, and how much do I get out of there. So I was, I don't remember now, I don't have in front of me my research note, but I think, so I was doing, the ratio 1:20, which we talked about with Gretchen, that would be the best. So I mixed several different kinds of oil with water, 1:20, and then, which means 1.5 ml, I think, of the product, and then I think 30 milliliters of the water, and yeah, that's what I mixed, and then I was able to recover roughly always under 1 milliliter of the product out of the frozen water. So it depended, some products where I was able to recover quite a bit, like 1 milliliter, which I think is still pretty good. That was the dielectric con Edison fluid. That's what I got from from the state. So we were testing that. Thank you, Randy. And then I was testing, crude oil and the usual ones, which oils like VW 30 and 5W30, and then 20W50, and then 80W90, etc. And they had different ratios of like how much could I recover. But so at that time I was thinking like, that's it, that's the maximum. But right now, a couple of days ago, I did actually repeated recoveries, of the water. So I defrosted it and and then froze it again, collected oil, and then froze it again, collected oil. So I was able to recover actually a little bit more and add to the samples, which was like, I don't know, 5 to 10 drops from each piece, which is pretty good, I think. Like we got almost 1 milliliter from everyone. And at barn raising, we had a really awesome discussion, which Jeff did a research note out of that about how to recover more oil and what would be the ways. And we figured out that, yeah, actually, we can use also the pig mats, which I received just 2 days ago on Saturday. So I'm going to work on that right now. And yeah. Oh, sorry. Regarding to the freezing method, I also discovered that, and thanks for the comments underneath. So there was, I realized that oil changes color and the spectra regarding like how cold it is, actually. So now I have to now I'm remeasuring all the spectra with like better temperature because I have to add it today to the research note, but it definitely changes the spectra, and you have to wait for the oil to heat it up. Don't measure it right away when you recover the oil from the ice. So, but it looks like it's actually pretty okay after you heat it up.
Oh.
Yeah. And I have much more. I don't know how much should I talk.
No, it's cool. I think it's really great to get a background a little bit on the different aspects of the projects that people have been working on. So thank you. That's really exciting. I guess I'd just like to kind of open it up for discussion. If anybody has questions or comments or ideas to share on the project, if things are unclear, or one thing that we haven't talked about, which I'd love to point to Anne at some point a little bit, is about the narratives that go along with this. Like, who exactly are we talking about could use this kit, and to what ends? But I just figured I'd kind of open it up if anybody has other things to add or ask or share. Can't hear you, Anne.
I said if no one does, I can go next.
You'd have to come a little bit closer, sorry.
Okay, yeah, you can.
Okay. Is this better? If I'm
Yeah.
over here? Okay. Cool. So I actually just had a meeting this morning with Gretchen, who I think is still here. So I don't know if she wants to join in too. But we talked a bit about like what we saw and heard at the barn raising regarding the kit, and also some of the narratives that we were thinking of developing. So it's kind of sort of centering around stories from an advocacy point of view, and then stories for education. So actually something you brought up at the last organizer meeting about your work with the green team and testing the kit and sort of discovering what you find. And so that, I think, would fit under sort of the education narrative. Another way we thought about sort of talking about or using the kit would be around types of use. So themes of like using it on land or using it on water. So for example, Scott's presentation at the barn raising about finding leftover, I guess, oil residue on the beaches and testing that could be an interesting way of looking at it. Versus, I guess, some of the communities I've spoken with up north in Canada who have been doing field work around sites of oil extraction or transportation and needing the kit in the field for that. And so we have about 4 or 5 possible narratives that I'm going to explore in the coming weeks. And of course, if anyone has you know, things that they think of, you can contact me. I'm not sure how to put that on the site, but.
We've had a couple questions from Jeff. I don't know if you want to unmute and ask them, or I can ask them for you. We're getting some echo, I think, from New York.
All right, New York's muted. Yeah, well, one thing was, Anne, have you connected with Mary Knosian, who was at the barn raising and gave a great presentation about oil spills from trains?
No, so she's actually on the list. I forgot to mention. Gretchen and I talked about that. And yeah, and so to change that clear oil spill constraint is another one. Oh, I also forgot to mention, we also looked into tanker spills.
The what?
Tanker spills.
Oh.
Tankers. So seeing a spill and trying to decide whether it's crude or diesel. So like.
Thanks.
Yeah, I guess another thing I was thinking about was, you know, what would be the next steps for like a really rigorous test we want to do to get closer to a test that we could use with field samples? Because it seems like we're sort of attacking it from the other end as well, which is great. Like, how do you collect things out of the, you know, from space, difficult to collect from spaces like the surface of water or from soil or from train tracks. And then we're working on it from the side of like, does the oil kit itself reliably test something at all that we know? And so there's a bunch of steps between those two to where we'd hopefully have a kit that would tell someone something about an unknown sample using the fluorescence. So I thought it'd be a good chance to sort of, we talked about these a lot, of course, you know, in different venues, but to sort of, you know, chat a bit about like what would the next few tests be that we'd want to try and get really reliable. Matthew, do you have thoughts on that? Or anyone else, really?
I mean, I think the first step would be pushing for replication of the basic assay and just testing through it. I mean, the next thing would be prepping the samples that are actually from different crude oils out in the field and collected samples. I mean, yeah, but it's hard to talk about next steps with the state of the current analysis assessment. I mean, we were talking about working through software recipes, so that there was the step-by-step instructions were integrated into Spectral Workbench. I think that would be a really valuable part of improving the test. Yeah.
I might add to that it will be great. I'm working with Ethan on the mineral oil ratio to the recovered product, and to figure out where it shifts the spectra and where it doesn't. So this would be actually the immediate next step into like getting more reliable analysis of the collected samples, because like what I have been doing is up until now I was just testing actually the oil without mixing it with mineral oil. But it seems like there was a big discussion about the ratios at barn raising, and this is what kind of came out of that we probably would have to, and no matter what, mix it with something. So we need to really, let's say, pin down the the spectra when the oil is mixed with when the recovered product is mixed with the mineral oil. That will be the great step, and we are doing like several different mixtures, like adding drops, like 0.05 milliliter amounts to 1 ml of the mineral oil. So that will be the immediate next step to get really not shaky with the results, probably, and then we can go further.
I have two posts in from Gretchen on the chat. One is, I think it's an important step would be to try contaminating soils or sands that we know are clean with oil, and trying to later describe the oil and analyze it from, I guess, within that contaminated sample. And the other post from Gretchen is that she'd like to hear from, I believe it's Randy, with the NYDEC, about how he receives calls about oil spills, and whether or not receiving a DIY fluorescent spectra would be useful to him before responding.
Hi, this is Randy.
Hi, Randy.
Yeah, we have a 24-hour hotline number, and people call in the spill reports, usually get the location, the material, that as far as they understand it, describe it as best they can. Uh, we, we don't really get efflorescence kind of reports or anything like that. We've done our own testing with using UV ray, which is a common way of measuring fluorescence off of oil over the years. First time I've heard about laser being used as a way to measure it. But yeah, typically any kind of lab data or results that we get that indicates an oil spill, we follow up with the caller and we follow up with investigating the matter to determine what the course of action is. For instance, we get lab results from people that do sampling on sites as a part of due diligence for a real estate transaction. If they find evidence of petroleum contamination, they'll call it into our New York State spill hotline. And most state agencies have spill hotlines that you call into. And we'll take that data, we'll call the person and get further lab results and more information about the history of the site and what other observations they have. So that's how we do it, and we get those calls 24 hours a day.
I have a follow-up question for you as well. I'm wondering about the costs for the lab tests and the work that goes into what you produce in responding to this. And this kind of comes from sort of the history of this. The oil testing kit was originally a lot of people were sending samples, unknown samples of oily material to the labs post BP oil spill, and it was a burden. The cost burden was on essentially the people who were sending this test, and the people who were affected. And I'm kind of wondering, in terms of how you go through the process, if something has to be sent onto the lab, who does the cost go to?
Well, initially we go to the responsible party for the spill, and we would orchestrate any kind of sampling with their work, with their contractors, consultants, and lab contractors. So that work would be the responsibility of the person who actually had the spill. If they didn't take responsibility, then it would fall upon the state, and the state would have to take the samples. We're kind of leery about receiving samples from the public because, as you know, sample integrity is key to making sure that you're getting a good volume of the sample and that there's no volatilization of the sample or anything like that. So we typically take our own samples. We do get lab results. We do get people showing up with jars of oil and water and who knows what. And we'll examine that just from visibly looking at it. But the real analysis really needs to be done under proper control conditions with adequate transport, chain of custody if you use it for a court case or something like that. Taking it to a certified laboratory, they typically do a GCMS on it to determine what the material is. They can look at it and tell you what the product is, how fresh it is, and the quantity of it. And then comparing it to state standards and criteria, you can determine whether it's a violation of state law. And so that's typically how we do it. So yeah, we get samples. People show up with their mayonnaise jars of things, but we typically like to do the samples on our own so we know that the samples are taken properly.
Do you have a publicly available protocol for people in terms of collecting samples if, say, they haven't been able to get someone on site?
Typically not. We tell them if they can collect something to wear gloves and protect themselves. If it's a sheen on the water, we'll tell them how to collect it, although sheens are very hard to analyze because it's a very minuscule amount of oil typically in an oil sheen. But what you want to do is get there as soon as possible. The key that what we do is we're on 24-hour call. We do emergency response. So, and a lot of environmental agencies do this. We'll get right out there and take our own samples so that people aren't exposed to anything. Because we really don't want to steer somebody into an unknown. We don't want them to get involved in a situation where they could be exposed to something that's far more dangerous than just a regular oil spill.
Good, thank you. And Jeff, you've pinged in here with a couple questions. You want to go?
Yeah, I had a question, actually a follow-up for Randy, and not to harry you with too many questions, but we've been interested in collecting and analyzing samples that the state has already tested so that we can correlate our test with official lab tests. I'm curious, what would be the easiest way for us to do that? I mean, do you share samples once you're done with them, or could we try to go to a sampling site at the same time as the state samples are being collected?
Oops, hold on. I'm trying to unmute you, and I cannot figure out how to do this.
I did that.
There we go. Thanks.
Okay, back on. To answer your question, it's plausible for you to take matching samples, to take samples at the same time we would, but that would have to be with the concurrence of the responsible party. If you're sampling on private property, obviously you have to gain access and get approval to do that. But it is plausible to do that, and you would be able to take your sample in addition to the samples taken by the state and by the responsible party and do cross comparisons. That's nothing unusual. We do split sampling all the time. And the thing is that it would have to meet the criteria of what's established for analysis and determination of the sampling results. And that typically has to go to a certified lab and has to go through the whole process of the CMS with interpretation. So, but it would be a good idea just to see what the reliability is, comparing it to like a top-notch laboratory, what a field test would do. We're constantly looking for ideas about being able to do quick and easy field testing. Some of this stuff works, some of it is not that reliable, but I think it's a good idea. If you can team up with your local state agency or government agency that does this kind of work, oil spill response, see if they'd be willing to work with you in terms of taking a sample out of site where they are taking samples themselves and then comparing the results at the end of it. And the other thing is that you can take these samples yourself, and then basically you can do a freedom of information request to the state agency or the local agency to get the results on that particular sample.
Great, thank you. Aaron, I noticed you joined us. We all went around and did a little bit of intros. Sorry, let me mute New York again for this. Would you mind introducing yourself and saying where you're calling in from and what brought you to the call today?
Sorry, were you talking to me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Yeah, there was a little bit of echo, so I couldn't hear you. My name is Arun. I just got my
Yay!
a couple of hours back, and I was just putting it together, and there was a tweet which mentioned there was a call, and I joined.
Awesome. Where are you calling in from?
From Bangalore in India.
Great. Thanks for joining. So you put your spectrometer together, and what are you hoping to run as samples with it?
So here we have some issues with water pollution in the lakes. There's been few lakes which are catching fire and all sorts of strange things happening.
Wow.
Yeah, so me and my friend, we collected water samples from it and tried to get it tested in private laboratories here, but it was turning out too expensive. And we weren't really sure what we would find out. And I was looking around the net and found a public lab, and I thought of giving the kit a try, which is why I ordered it. And I don't know if it's going to work, but it's worth a try.
All right. Well, thanks for calling in. And feel free, if you have any questions or comments there's a bunch of people on the call, a number of whom have worked through the oil testing kit project, and also people who have worked with the spectrometer and other capacities testing other contaminated or known and unknown samples. So thanks for joining. Great. Well, I wanted to ask New York again. You have someone else in the room who has experience with oil and work with oil, and I'm trying to remember your name again. I was wondering if you could come and talk. Yeah, I see you. If you could talk a little bit about the work that you do, and remind me your name.
Yeah, my name is Willis.
Hi, Willis. Thanks.
Hey, Newtown Creek Alliance, and
oh, great.
Yeah, so I think a lot of stuff we've done is on the reporting end. We call Randy and his team when spills are seen or when there's a large sheen seen on the creek, and I think it's been pretty good that there's more people activated around our waterway. So when they see stuff, they're actually reporting it. It's still a little bit of an issue. Sometimes there's I mean, it's getting better. Sometimes somebody will send me a photo of something. And but it is, as Randy mentioned, it's really about the response and the enforcement, because a lot of times when you see stuff on the water, it's really hard to track where it came from. So the quicker you can get there for them to either get a sample or to try to understand what the conditions are, if it was blown down by the wind, like a few miles upstream or whatever. But that's a lot of what we do, is just out on the waterway. And Newtown Creek has historically had a lot of awful spills of petroleum, and petroleum products, and it still continues to be a theme. But yeah, that's there's still people illegally dumping or companies illegally dumping. So we try to. Well, there was last summer there was a lot of we'd seen a lot of.
What was the question? Sorry.
If we caught somebody last year, we didn't really too much credit for us, but there was a lot of reports to the oil spill hotline. A lot of chains seen around a certain area, and then Randy at DC, they received an anonymous tip of someone dumping into a storm drain, and were able to do a investigation. And I don't know if the latest happened with that. But
Well, we didn't catch him in the act, and that was the problem.
Yeah.
So we got him on some minor violations, but he's being watched. We know who he is. He knows that we're watching him. You have to understand that my office is about 5 minutes away from the street.
We're having a little bit of a hard time hearing you. If you want to come a little bit closer. Sorry.
Okay. Our office is about 5 minutes away from Newtown Creek, so it's very easy for us to get out there quick. And that's the key to all this stuff, is to get out there as soon as possible to try to catch the event and try to find out what's going on. So, face that or face that?
Yes, sir, Ken.
Face the camera. Okay. So, as a result, we were able to, we didn't catch this guy actually in the act, but we caught him with a lot of damning evidence. So we shut him down in terms of having him work in that area with further dumping, and immediately the creek cleared up. I mean, we found the single source. It's very rare, particularly with a complex situation, historical problem like Newtown Creek, where you catch somebody and automatically you see a very marked change in the water quality just by catching one guy. But there are still people out there dumping in storm drains and everything like that. And every once in a while you see a lot of rainbow sheen that's going on continually. You crack it back to the source. We've had a couple of events like that in Newtown Creek, and it's worked out very favorably, where we have been able to track it back and find the people and stop them doing it, penalize them, and have them correct. That's what I do. We have a great team along Newtown Creek with the Newtown Creek Alliance and other groups. Today I'm just meeting Public Labs for the first time, getting to know what they do. So hopefully we can work together in a partnership to protect the creek and also work on Gowanus Canal and some of the other water bodies in New York City, so that it's a team. There isn't this thing where it's government versus public and vice versa, and everybody's working in their own little world. We're trying to get everybody together so that we're kind of sharing information and helping each other out. That's my goal, anyway.
Well, we're glad to have you here, and thanks for opening up that line of communication. I think a lot of that is really what this is about, is learning collaboratively about how we can better communicate on these things, what information you need from us when we report a spill or report some activity, and yeah, thank you. And I'm sorry, I'm just following both the chats here. There was a lot of excitement. Aaron, I'm not sure, Aaron, if you've seen as well the OpenHour chat page, but there are people who are excited about you tweeting in. So there's people asking for email communication with you on your project and what you've been working on. So just inside info. Anybody else? Ideas or ways this could be used in other places? I'm interested. You know, Public Lab, we work across many different states and countries, and I'm really interested in the idea of how the Newtown Creek has been reporting in New York, and I'm also wondering if it's different in different. I mean, if different information should be collected in different states, and then also when we work internationally, you know, with people on having some of these concerns, what are some of the basic things that we should be collecting when we go to a site? I mean, obviously, maybe time and date, but those basic parameters, what are you looking for when someone is reporting, just in general speaking, about a spill?
Time, date, location. When the spill was first, or the water quality event was first observed, describing it. Pictures tell 1,000 words, so if you can send us photographs, that's tremendous in terms of us understanding what's going on. It also provides initial documentation of the problem. The problem, as you can imagine, with a lot of these spill events, they tend to be ephemeral, so by the time we get out there, Even if you hurry to get out there, they may be gone. In a tidal situation, the tide may carry it out. Weather conditions can change it. If it's windy or if it's rainy, they can take out the evidence of the problem. And then you're really faced with whatever people observe. So the key is to get some pictures. Everybody carries a smartphone or a camera of some kind nowadays, so they can take pictures for us and they can send it to us, and we can at least have that initial documentation. And even if it doesn't turn out to be an issue that particular day, if you see a pattern of problems, we can then go ahead and start to launch a full investigation, like we've done in the past with some of these things. I teach a training course to people in the public called Oil Spill 101, where I talk about this. I talk about how to report things to agencies, what the different agencies in New York City do to respond to oil spills. I talk about the terminology to use so that you're respected and that they know that you know what you're talking about, how to deal with things initially, how to quantify them. Talk about different water quality issues like organic schemes and talk about fish kills and algal blooms and all the things that people see on waterways that they may or may not understand what's going on. Some of these things are fairly innocuous, and some of them are fairly dangerous, and you have to understand the difference, be able to report that accordingly. And correspondingly, as citizens, you should also get information back. So you should understand that you have the Freedom of Information Law in the United States, and I don't know how it is in other countries. But you have other laws that apply where you can actively get information about something. And you should always have that string that you can pull back so that when you make your report, you have somebody to talk to or you have an identification number for that report, so that when you call into the agency, you can give them the tracking number and they can tell you what the status is. You can talk to the investigator. The other thing is that not everybody in government is very friendly. Not everybody is going to be have an attitude towards the public that's going to be very positive. So you have to learn how to be, forthright and work your way up the ladder. I talk to your supervisor. I talk to his supervisor. Do it friendly, but get the point across that if you want to find out information about your complaint and about what you brought in, they should, at the very least, tell you what's happening, what's going on. They can tell you everything that's a law enforcement case, but they can give you a general idea of where they're going with the case. And last, I want to say that you should network with people in government that work in these agencies, particularly response people. Response people like myself are very field forward, and we're very friendly with the public because we feel them all the time. And anybody that helps us is considered a friend and ally. So you should reach out and try to work with those people as well in your local communities so that they understand that you're interested in what they're doing, and by such they will work with you on whatever it is that they're doing. That's pretty much it. I have a 3-hour course that talks about a lot of this, but I can't do that.
I'm getting a question. Oh, I'm getting feedback again. Thanks. I have a question from the chat on the public lab page, and it's from P.D. Hicksonbow, if I didn't botch that name, sorry. It says, I'm not sure if this question was asked yet, and I can tell you it wasn't, but can the spectra differentiate well between different types of oils or fluids? For example, could a sample at an outfall be tested for what is in it and use that as a clue to look upstream for which places might discharge that type of fluid?
No, that wouldn't really work. Our spectrometer can't actually just identify the constituent components of any specific chemical you're testing. You would need to have an idea of what you were looking at to begin with. That's why oil is something where we know that something can be an oil because of its oil sheen. And then with our oil grading assay, even in its best form, it would be very crude. It can only tell whether something is crude or a refined product, not necessarily identify exactly what you're looking at. So it would be unlikely that you would be able to actually identify the chemical that you're looking at. You'd only be able to tell whether it was a crude oil or a refined product in its current state. There's an issue. Our spectrometer only has wavelength intensity calibrated right now, so you can tell where light is along a spectra. We don't have intensity calibration installed, so we don't know how bright a specific spectra is. Without that, it's very circumscribed the kind of wet chemistry you can actually do with the spectrometer. So there are a very limited number of tests that can be done, even with some sort of sample prep, where you could actually determine what you're looking at until that intensity calibration issue is addressed.
Thanks.
Yeah, to add in, our spectrometer is best right now at comparative work. So, like what Matthew is saying is that in the oil test beta program, we're comparing oils like an unknown to a range of known samples, and we're looking at it, where does it compare along, spectrum of like whether it's bluish or reddish in the fluorescence. And we've only looked at oils, and we're not even really done with that test. But yeah, all of the work that's been done, like I know Yuz has done work where he looks at intensity, but he only does it in a comparative way, which for the purposes of his test, it was enough. But it's only in comparison to a bunch of prepared samples at different dilutions, and figuring out where an unknown falls along a series of, relative to a series of prepared samples. So it has to be a pretty constrained question you ask.
So we have about 5 minutes left if anybody else wants to ping in with some questions or comments for anyone else who's here. I've muted New York, so if anyone's speaking there, I can't figure out how to unmute you. Are you talking about us? All right. Nothing from anyone? Did I just kill it?
I mean, I have lots of ideas or questions and things that I'd like to do, but I don't think they fit in 5 minutes. So.
Try for one.
This is Tony.
Oh, go for it, Tony.
Yeah,
Oh.
sure.
Hi, Tony.
Question. Hi.
Can you turn your screen down a little bit?
My what?
There we go.
I
Thanks.
didn't even know that was there. I'm just wondering, what feedback are we getting on the usability of this kit as far as this being a beta test of the kit itself, and how many people have actually gone through and just done the tests described there, and are we following up with questions of them? And mainly, like, are there things that we can do to simplify, like, what are the barriers to entry on this? I get the sense that we haven't got a ton of people actually just doing the base tests, and I just want to know, how can we do that? Just focusing this as a test on the kit itself.
Well, to date, I can say that no one has actually replicated the step through that I'd done last November. And coming back, seeing the oil spectra coming back from staff and community members running in the oil testing beta, one of the big issues has been clipping spectra. You can see this throughout people's test spectra. So I can share my screen for a little second. So this is this was the issue that we were facing, which is the channels actually clipping and flattening out. This is Ethan's set, and he's got this question about the roundness of spectra. And you can see these upper spectra are getting clipped if we go to look at them. Oh, that's a screenshot. Get to the embedded spectra. And so if you go in here to your spectral workbench set and click on More Tools, toggle RGB, you can see whether or not the spectra is getting clipped. This was, at one point in time, Jeff had been working on a warning system that would tell you whether this works. It seems to have been, I'm not sure if that's still existent in the calibration system, but I was noticing Jeff's spectra as well also had that same clipping issue. So yeah, that was something that, I don't know, we'd worked through last fall. I don't know why it seems to still be an issue for the beta team and staff too, but you know, I'm still waiting for someone to try to run through this calibration assay using the equipment, and so yeah, I'm interested in what the barriers have been internally, both for staff and community members on you know, getting good spectra, and why, you know, whether we can make better warnings that prevent that type of clipping in capture, which makes the assay much less accurate. So.
Great. And Tony, I think maybe you missed earlier, there was, you just pinged in a little bit on the beta program and how it was going, and that we've really only had 2 people walk through the full program, which is, I mean, not to say that they haven't been scanning samples, but a lot of people seem to be getting caught up in the calibration aspect and just sort of going through building the spectrometer, putting everything together, and figuring out the calibration and to make the next step into testing. So I think there are a lot of stages to the beta program, and part of it as well was just we were getting the materials together at different times, and who knows? Some of the people we've heard from a good deal on or who have responded, and some less so. So I think, you know, the beta program has now kind of extended a long time, a good bit beyond its original timeline, but we're still looking for, you know, feedback on the kits and everything else. So if you have one, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, I guess I'm just fishing for if there's something real simple, such as there's difficulty putting it together or something, or if it's simply a matter of time for people. But I just want to make sure it's visible as an object, like for us to just know if there's a problem we can fix, because as part of the test is just usability.
Yeah. Great.
So feedback that we get from people may not be the real feedback that they provide. In the sense, after some time, they can just say, oh, my schedule has changed. I don't have enough time to do that. Sorry. But what they meant is maybe they tried it. It was so difficult, but shy to say it and just say, now I'm busy. Sorry. Yeah. So that's a little tricky to figure out what is the real reason. I mean, we started a little late. I can understand that people's schedules may change because we started like almost 1.5 months late. But it's like a peer pressure thing going on as well. If you see someone is posting something and you may feel, oh, I'm the only stupid one who couldn't figure out, then you may say, sorry, now I have an issue, my schedule has changed, sorry, I'm sending it back. But it means actually, sorry, I'm not that fast. So these are tough questions. I don't know how to ask those questions. Yeah. I guess it's few things happening at the same time with this beta testing. How you put everything together, how you manage to work with Spectral Workbench, and how you manage and understand if something is wrong, how to fix it, and how you ask for help. So everything is kind of mixed. So that's the tricky. I mean, it's a little tricky to understand what is going on, actually.
And I think it is telling that a lot of people seem to be stuck on the calibrating part, or they're just not making that extra leap past it. And I'm wondering if some documentation on calibrating, or ways, you know, like we talked a little bit about the recipes for Spectral Workbench, if one just walks through calibration. I know it does, but maybe because you look at specific samples is different than just thinking about calibrating your spectrometer. I know that's like, I'm a little bit beyond right now, but that was one of the things we ran into with the green team, was just trying to understand which things needed to be calibrated and when. And that was just a question that sort of kept coming up as we continued to do sampling. So I'm betting that that's also kind of expanding on beyond just who I've done this with and what we've seen a little bit as far as how far people get in the beta program. But, well, I'm not certainly going to hold anyone here. So I'll leave the line open for anyone who wants to chat and talk. But thank you so much for everybody who's joined, and look forward to next month's Open Hour. I'll post information about it on the Open Hour page, so check back in. And if you're not following the Big Public Lab Google group, I post there as well about the Open Hours. So thanks, everyone. And I'll leave the line open if anybody has any other thoughts or things they want to share.
I did have a question. Well, 2 questions. Just, you know, running the workshops as I routinely have in the past year, there's been a much greater likelihood of running into a general, like just being in a building that has a full spectrum fluorescent bulb. So even though it's a compact fluorescent, it doesn't work. Like you can't assume that any CFL is good for calibration. So I wondered, have we added a note about that to our documentation, or do you want me to?
I wonder if that's something we could add to the kit easily.
Oh yeah. The other thing, I had another question about, related to the lights that we use. I wonder, has anyone in the community figured out a good way to slightly diminish the intensity of the light source? Either calibrating it with a really bright fluorescent bulb or while shining this really bright laser. Is there any translucent material that doesn't mess up stuff that we could use?
Matthew, I see you itching.
Yeah, if you look at I'll pull it up. If you look at the oil testing kit beta, we're using there's a small slider that goes in front of the laser.
Sure, I can find one.
A series of little different printed gradients. Here, I'm sharing my screen right now. So this is what we put in front of the laser right now to dim it, which is a series of gradations just printed out on a laser printer, and that works all right. It's not the most precise dimming, but I would assume that something similar would work for a any other light source of just printing out some black on a laser printer transparency sheet.
Cool, thanks.
Also, you can calibrate with a regular fluorescent bulb. I'm not sure there are instructions around this, but generally only one of the blue lines, not one of the blue lines you need, is missing from the regular fluorescence. Sometimes it's there, but you can still use the same lines we use in compact fluorescence are present in large tube fluorescence. So when we're in the office, I've used these lights before.
And I'm getting a post from from Jeff that that you can post about. Can you post about the CFLs that didn't work for calibration? He hasn't heard of those before. Oh, and now he understands fluorescence versus CFLs. Okay, thanks, Jeff. Anyone else? No. Okay. Well, thanks everyone again. Thanks for joining in New York. I hope you have a great holiday party. Thanks for spending the hour with us.
Thank you. Okay, everyone say bye. Bye, Stevie.
Bye. Bye.